here, and you have a great audience. I appreciate it. I'm here. I'm available.
Nice. Yeah, lucky. I get schooled every day from the audience, so it's definitely an entertaining adventure. But what got you into studying sacred geometry and fractals within fractals? Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, graduate psychophysiology, University of Detroit, electrical engineering there. So I became interested in the physics of consciousness. I was a polygraph operator and builder, and I was taught by the inventors of the term biofeedback, Albert Axe, etc. We now have 6 biofeedback apps on the App Store, including flameinmind.com. And then I was a systems analyst at IBM and was an electrical engineer for 25 years. And it's a bit of a long story, but I ended up going around the world every year for 15 years or so, teaching physics of consciousness and things like that. Currently, though, we're doing mostly advanced technologies, carbon nano, energy, that kind of thing. My plasma rejuvenation app, Therify.net, is functional in 25 countries, doing basically pain reduction and rejuvenation with phase conjugate negentropic plasma. It's kind of like a med bed. And then my imploder tech, theimploder.com, has been around the world for 15 years. Implosion for water, and then our Brainwave app, flameinmind.com, for teaching bliss in brainwaves. So we have a lot going on. We're having some fun too.
That's one heck of a resume. Thank you for doing what you do. And so you brought up these applications that are available on your phone. Are they like frequencies that emit from your phone, or what do they do?
Yes. Okay. So our biofeedback apps, there are 6 of them on the App Store. Flameinmind.com and iThrive.com are the most famous ones, probably. Flameinmind.com claims to be the most powerful way to teach bliss in brainwaves. So we have pioneered the ability to measure golden ratio in brainwave frequency signatures. Alpha to beta golden ratio identified, for example, children who could see without their eyes, and we have a program to do that. And we have the most powerful available binaural beat for bliss audio cues, which are available with or without the brainwave app inexpensively. And then the iThrive app, which teaches heart coherence. And then realheartcoherence.com, which measures empathy and tantra by measuring full EKG power spectra of 2 people. And so there's a lot there.
Absolutely. So, and then I want to go back to physics of consciousness. What is consciousness?
You know what? It's strange to say it, but we claim to know.
That's even more exciting. Let's hear it, man. I'm hoping up if I see.
Well, if you look at the latest blog at our Therify.net, Theraphi, Therify.net, you'll see the links about the latest discoveries in physics of consciousness. And let me put it very briefly. So all the people who have been studying the brain have been in denial about the simple physics, is that there's millions of solid reports that you can take your ability to see outside of your head. That's obvious. There's millions of people who've proven your ability to see can leave your head. You can take whether you call it astral projection, remote viewing, near-death experience. So obviously the ability to see does not require your head. That's simple physics. It's proven. The other thing that are proven is that the focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. So focused human attention electrically causes something centripetal. That's been measured, Bill Tiller's work, etc. The other thing that's been documented is that peak experience, peak perception, and bliss, and all these things correlate to golden ratio in EEG, which we now know is an implosive cascade. So this has led us to teach the physics of consciousness, actually. We know exactly what it is, and it's not subjective. And it teaches you, for example, how to lucid dream and survive death quite clearly. And it teaches you what electric field can enable you to lucid dream and survive death and astral project and remote view, actually. As, for example, our Therify.net produces a phase conjugate implosive. It visualized big pine cones kissing noses electrically, broad spectral phase conjugation. Is proven to trigger lucid dreaming. And we know the physics exactly and why it enables action at a distance. When those charge waves converge like big pine cones, they implode, do something called phase conjugate. And that converts a transverse up and down electromagnetic to a longitudinal, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional. And longitudinal interferometry is the physics of action at a distance and the physics of gravity, and the only physics of every single spiritual phenomena, whether it's memory through death, collective unconscious, communion of saints. It's all specifically longitudinal interferometry, and we can prove it, including where the Kogis go to talk to ancestors. We've measured the fractality of the air. We know exactly what enables that. And we know why Kozyrev mirrors made that telepathy so well, because at these magnetic line node cross points, Ikosa dodeca, there's a fractal array which efficiently enables the propagation of longitudinal interferometrics, basically the compressional wave component of electromagnetics that's not often used or understood by scientists because they don't know why an object falls to the ground. At any rate, when you understand longitudinal waves, you can teach lucid dreaming. You can teach the physics of how to make healing at a distance regular and dependable. Einstein called that action at a distance spooky specifically because he didn't know why objects fall to the ground. And now we know that longitudinal waves will reconverge cross at a distance at a fractal array, and you inhabit that fractal array like a rose, and that's your mind unpacking. It's called evolution of consciousness. So at any rate, for example, sunrise and sunset are good times for action at a distance, or why Agnihotra works, or magnetic line crosses, which also reduce radioactivity measurably. We know exactly why. We know how the Ark of the Covenant worked to reduce radioactivity measurably. So the physics of consciousness is basically simple. You got a magnetic donut inhabits your head, and when it gets centripetal enough and coherent enough, you can project it out of your head and it's inhabitable. It teaches exactly why ghosts make the room a bit colder. It teaches exactly where ghosts go after death. It teaches you the physics of the electric field to make successful birth and death possible. I mean, this is a lot of stuff. But basically, you have always inhabited a fractal array. It's called your synapses. But when that array gets bigger, you can inhabit a larger array, like sort of Dave in 2001. Anyway, I would carry on if you don't stop me.
No, I'm not going to stop you yet because I'm just absorbing this as best as possible. So what you're saying is, in a few words, is if you can make your brain or your consciousness within your brain this magnetic donut, I think you said.
Yes, it's a plasma donut. Plasma donut is the correct term. Yes.
Plasma donut. I love it.
Yep.
So that sounds delicious, right?
Well,
it's very smart, too.
The more centripetal it is, the more conscious you are literally, and that's electrically measurable. It's not subjective. You know, when the Dracos do a mind meld with Orion Queen Moggs and you feel this vice-like grip, they think humans are stupid and edible like chickens because we can't get centripetal. Because we don't know what any centripetal force is, like life, consciousness, and the cause of gravity. It's called charge implosion. It's due to phase conjugation. So once you know why anything gets centripetal, you can know what life is, what consciousness it is, and what gravity is.
Centripetal. I haven't heard that term before.
It's basically the opposite of centrifugal. So, you know, the reason physicists don't know why objects fall to the ground, NASA, Einstein, Stephen Hawking do not have a clue why objects fall to the ground. That's why they will never know what life is or consciousness is, or even what evolution of consciousness is. So when I wrote my new equation called Origin of Biologic Negentropy, the definition of all fractality, proving how fractality causes gravity. Many physicists already believe fractality causes gravity, but they don't know how. So it's Planck length and time, the universal musical key signature of the universe, times the integer exponent of golden mean ratio, perfected fractality, self-embedding, entanglement, that kind of thing. And that exponent's golden ratio times Planck produce 3 exact radii of hydrogen, and it proves how and why hydrogen makes gravity because it's fractal. And the heart rate variability, LF component mayor wave, predicts the brainwave harmonics of bliss. Alpha beta predicts the Schumann harmonics, Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year. All of the frequencies the universe uses to make negentropy. So it's important to teach your kids. Your physics teacher was exactly wrong when he said the universe is condemned to entropy disorder. Wrong. The physics is there is a path to self-organization. It teaches you, for example, why Gaia is measurably self-organizing, because the Schumann harmonics fit my equation. And that creates implosion, phase conjugate, fractality, and that creates centripetal force. That's the cause of life force, consciousness, and gravity. And also the only way to evolve and grow your aura. So get fractal or get dead. That's the bumper sticker.
I like that. And the t-shirt. Get the t-shirt and the bumper sticker.
There you go.
Soon, coffee mugs. So the fractal itself, it's imploding within itself, based upon sacred numbers and sacred geometry.
Golden mean ratio primarily, because it perfects adding and multiplying. So the phase velocity vectors, as they compress in golden ratio, like a rose, add and multiply the phase velocity heterodynes. And that implosive acceleration of charge due to fractality is named the gravity, because the phase velocities add and multiply recursively only in golden ratio. And so once you understand that acceleration of charge is the only definition of gravity, just like rotation of charge is the only definition of mass and time, so then you understand why anything gets centripetal. So then you know why your aura requires a particular kind of fractal environment, namely not a steel and aluminum building full of electrosmog and dead air. Your children are going to lose their souls.
Go back to that last part you just said.
Well, basically that there's a certain electrical environment. For example, when Korotkov followed the Kogis to where they telephoned their ancestors and measured the fractality of the air, which is basically charge distribution efficiency optimized due to fractality, visualize a rose. It's the only place the Kogi could phone their ancestors. Later, they used the same physics for the Kozyrev mirrors for military quality telepathy. So that distribution array, which is fractal, looks like a rose, is the nodal points at which the collective unconscious, communion of saints, ancestral memory, song lines, these are all named sort of fractal array of nodes of longitudinal interferometry. The same places that Bruce Cathy measured reduced nuclear critical mass, for the same reason that nuclear critical mass is reduced in the Ark of the Covenant, because it's implosive capacitance, which was its original purpose, actually. It was centripetal. So once you understand that array, you understand this is the only place your aura can unpack. And that's the definition of evolution. Actually, the talk I had prepared for this evening was about using this information to understand our position in the extraterrestrial politics.
So you brought up Draco. Like,
I did.
There's
absolutely
clearly that's one of the things that get into that level. It gets into the woo.
Yeah.
Some people are scared they're scared very much so of the Draco, and some people say, oh, that's swamp gas. So, but you brought up something about the mind, and they see things, they look at us differently because most people aren't tapping into this centralized force.
Well, humans are regarded as edible chickens by most of the reptilian species, and one of the reasons is because if we can't make centripetal force, that vice-like grip, then we are just edible chickens. They're right. And the way we get there is what I wanted to talk about. But first, what I wanted to say was that part of studying the evolution of consciousness for me has been studying the extraterrestrial history, which I've been doing for about 40 years. And I have known many of the people involved very personally. Alex Collier with the Andromedans, Barbara Myciniak with the Pleiadians. Anyway, there are dozens of these people that I knew because I've been studying extraterrestrial history for most of my life. And then subsequently, many of the Pleiadian friends, notably mediatormedias.wordpress.com, and of course there's other sources on the Pleiadians. And recently, my contacts with the Andromedans has meant some direct telepathic contact. So I claim to have specific personal contact with extraterrestrials, in addition to having friendships with all these people. So if you combine that with my work on the physics of consciousness, I believe I'm in a position to make a comment on where humans may emerge from complex extraterrestrial politics. And that's actually a theme I had prepared for this evening, actually.
Great. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Well, the short summary, you asked about Draco. For people who don't believe in them, I ask you to look up the word U-R-U, Uru, as in Europe, Ural, okay, or Nibiru, Hebrew, all of these words. The word U-R-U means ancient Draco blood. You can see my entire life's work on our position in the extraterrestrial history at the following link with all the pictures. I don't need to bring them up here because they're all there. It's fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. And you will see all of my life's work on this extraterrestrial history. So I wanted to make a little suggestion this evening, one particular part of that. And here's the part I was hoping to share. So recently, we've made several videos which actually went viral. And you can see our YouTube channel, which has over 1 million views itself, fractalfield.com. You can see all of our YouTube channels, et cetera, and all the index and our blogs on Facebook. So that viral video was called The Physics of Ascension, the real science of what ascension means. And maybe I can give a 1-minute summary. That video went viral, okay? A 1-minute summary is very simple. You take the harmonics of your brain and heart, a phonon implosive cascade, and you can measure the implosion in your DNA induced by that phonon sonic implosion as increased braid density in DNA. You can see all of that at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So your DNA braid implodes to embed a much longer wave of phonon coherence during human bliss. It's measurable. And what that does is that embeds a bigger donut around your body, obviously. Now, when that happens, and that is implosive, you become longitudinal coherent, which means ability to lucid dream, which means ability to take memory through death, and do everything that's interesting, do everything the Aboriginals considered interesting on the song lines, and steer the weather and a few other fun things. So longitudinal coherence in your aura, in the ancient times, the Egyptians called it the Ba from the Ka. Gurdjieff called it the Kesjan body, you know, and some people call it your higher self. Well, now actually electrical engineers can teach you how to do it, and that's what we're up to. So the physics of ascension is an introduction to the ET problem because, and that's the next part of this, that if you observe that what we call the Greys are really called the Khmers, and there are many branches of them, and they were mainly doing this on assignment. But 90% of the humans that they abducted after the Greada Treaty had some indigenous blood. There's a reason for that, and I've talked about this before. It has to do with the fact that they were the lucid dreamers. Now, why were the Greys abducting only the lucid dreamers? Does that mean they needed something we had? Question mark.
I've thought that.
Yeah. Okay. So next clue here. When I was living with Barbara, I was teaching at Barbara Marciniak's, and I noticed that the Pleiadians there were encouraging promiscuity in the Serpent Mound rituals of pregnant women. And I scratched my head. Now later we learned from multiple sources. First of all, you need a bit of context here. I'm going to talk about many species, but particularly I want to talk about the Andromedans and the Pleiadians. And I will tell you my prejudice. The Andromedans are the good guys, and the Pleiadians, not so much. Okay. The Andromedans are the ones that David Wilcox, he's confused about some physics, but he's right about the Blue Sphere Alliance. That's the Andromedans, because their blood is blue in the Krishna legend, et cetera, et cetera. And they are a very advanced culture. For example, their major craft in our neighborhood called Vieja, it's hundreds of kilometers across, triangular, hides behind the moon, and was used as the parking site for most of the extraterrestrials involved in recent battles around the Earth, especially the Pleiadians. Now, the Pleiadians had the biggest guns. This is Swaru and the story, and you can hear the prejudice of the Pleiadians at Gosha's Cosmic Agency YouTube channel. You'll hear all of their propaganda. But what they don't tell you is their problem, and that's what I'm here to talk about. Here is their problem. My friends, the Andromedans, were very clear, and Alex Collier was just one of them, who introduced me to the mystics of Andromeda, who's Morine and Visayas, and it was Visayas who was my friend, announced very clearly that these Pleiadians, and primarily the Tegans, their gene pool was going to fall apart within 980 years. They're very clear. The Andromedans are a very advanced culture. Now, why are these Pleiadians who are doing all this bragging on Gosha's YouTube channel, like, oh, we're superior, they say, oh, we're 5D and you're 3D and therefore you're inferior. This is their only statement, which is crap. What they mean is they have some longitudinal coherence. But what they don't talk about is their problem. Their problem is that as a drastically female-dominated culture, famous for abusing human males. I have emails. They're famous for abusing human males. And this was, by the way, the female culture from which Enki and Enlil's family ran from in the Pleiadians when they arrived here on Earth and started every single religion on Earth began with fear of women because of them. And why were they afraid of them? That's the fun part. Well, it turns out that being so So they're more female dominated than we were male dominated, and that sounds extreme, doesn't it? But it turns out that because then the women were so superior that they used parthenogenesis for most births, and eventually there ended up being only 20 to 25% males. Hello. And they founded non-ensouling ways to replicate. This is the problem. So if you have a clue of what the physics of getting a soul is, then, which is now we know, it's this implosion in the blood, which allows you to get longitudinal coherent and take memory through death. This is exactly what the ET cultures coming here and messing with us don't have. This is the theme, whether it's the Greys or the Pleiadians. What were they coming here for? We were the DNA library that has some of this remnant of ensouled DNA, which we are now losing fast. This means the kids who can lucid dream and have bliss have a prayer, and the rest, sorry. So the recurrent theme about the ET history is simple. They come here like we go to Disney World to look at the ancients because we're cute. We drive around in cars powered by dinosaurs farting, and we're a scream, man. But sophistication, no. Our technology is crap. We don't, you know, if we knew how you could rotate a conjugator to make both energy and propulsion, it makes every form of energy and propulsion on this planet look like the Stone Ages, because it is. All you have to do is make nanomaterials pure enough. But the military wants that. Question mark. That's another story. Well,
Daniel, let me jump in on that because I think we're having a matrix sync here. Recently, I started a new channel, a new adventure series called Conspiracy Detectives with Penelope Jean Hayes. And she has been kind of more on the mainstream, but she is extremely knowledgeable. She's a great reporter, and we connect well with our two personalities searching for hidden truths. And one of these hidden truths that we uncovered recently were carbon nanotubes.
Oh, exactly. Yes.
A doctor in France was finding these carbon nanotubes in asthmatic children.
Yeah.
And then we started to look deeper into these carbon nanotubes, and we're finding carbon nanotubes are used for just about everything from inducing certain pharmaceutical drugs to increasing fuel economy. So it's like, and then basically look at what a nanocarbon tube is. It's kind of like a nano dart. So everything's built upon nanos. I get that. And some people, like I'm a big fan of C60. I got some right here, the C60 Purple Power from Buckyball, Buck Fuller Ministry. These are nanos, right? But they're not nano darts. It's nanocarbons. It's like soccer balls.
But that is where a good place to start. So all of our graphics about that, we actually sell a kit to make that geometry. You know, I learned from Bucky Fuller personally, and I was a good friend of his, actually.
You did?
Yeah. And,
dude, you're awesome.
But the reason they call it fullerene is it's a stellated dodecacosa, which is the only possible three-dimensional fractal. The animation is at goldenmean.info/grail. All the pictures of the nanomaterials are at fractalfield.com/cold plasma. But let me just summarize. The physics of making carbon pure enough, which is the solution to every energy and propulsion technology on this planet, is that carbon grows like a flower called, I should have my model out here, my Star Mother kit, but the carbon grows like a flower in the right conditions. And here's an example of the right conditions. Our partners found out that carbon nano will not grow pure enough in USA and only in Europe. Later we learned why, because USA is 60 cycle. This is called a Tesla mistake, whereas Europe is 50 cycle. Turns out 50 cycle was the frequency most often mentioned in all the cancer literature for healing. It turns out 50 cycle is exactly, actually 49.97 hertz, exactly golden ratio times Planck, namely phase conjugate. There is your clue. There is a fractal electric field necessary to grow carbon pure enough to make energy and propulsion. And now when you get this flower grown pure enough, a nanotube looks like a ratcheted helix, very much like DNA, which becomes measurably a superconductor when zapped during the motion of during the moment of crystallization, just like a gold monofilament. And that superconductor is the phase conjugation down the center of that tube. Well, the short summary is that you rotate these conjugators of sufficient purity If you happen to understand why objects fall to the ground due to phase contribution, you know why this creates vacuum coherence. And you can see all the discussion and pictures at the international lecture I did at the Breakthrough Energy Movement in Amsterdam. Fractalfield.com/vacuum energy, including the PowerPoint is there. So this is the history of zero-point energy. The reason it is so relevant to our discussion about the evolution of consciousness is the same electric field which enables carbon to grow like a flower is the same electric field that allows consciousness to grow like a flower. Another example of get fractal or get dead. And by the way, you can then apply this to biologic architecture and predict in advance what building will cause a seed to grow by measuring its power spectra. And that tells you which building will cause a child to grow and determine which architects should get paychecks. We show 3 ways to measure that, goldenmean.info/architecture. So basically, again, it's a fractal field.
So this is like feng shui to the next level.
In fact, I taught physics of feng shui for many years. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yes, you're right. Which is, in electrical terms, called charge distribution efficiency.
So if you have the right shapes around you and you are built, let's say your house is on a specific ley line or energy line, then that could amplify the fractals. That could amplify the energy and the outcomes of these fractals that you're connected to.
Yeah, in a very practical level, if you walk into a building made of all steel and aluminum, you feel your aura go, oh shit. Whereas if you walk into a building made of all biologic materials, wood and natural stone and fabric, your aura goes, oh, I'm unpacking now. The reason you feel that way is because the capacitance of your aura has to entrain and embed in order to breathe. So every molecule that joined the sexy club called life read the bumper sticker called get fractal or get dead, and every molecule that became part of life rearranges its symmetry to be more fractal. And in electrical engineering terms, that's called dielectric constant, which is capacitance efficiency, which is charge distribution efficiency. So the reason that Steiner correctly taught that children should never touch synthetics, plastic or steel, should only touch biologic materials, he's correct, but we now know the physics, which is because it's only those items in which your aura can embed and propagate that allow your consciousness to grow.
Did you bring up Steiner, Rudolf Steiner?
Yeah, we teach
Didn't he also mention in the future, which is now, that there would be technologies that would be similar to the ancient Persian Dark Lord, basically, Ahriman.
Oh, yes. He called it Ahriman versus. He was indirectly referring to Enki versus Enlil, basically, and the conflict there is actually it is archetype. He's kind of right. So remember that artificial intelligence is this in some ways. The challenge, the scourge of almost all the evolved cultures. Remember, there's tens of thousands of humanoid cultures alone. In this galactic sector quadrant alone, we have multiple sources on that. So we shouldn't feel that special until we get our show together, actually. But what he meant by that was the issue of artificial intelligence is really quite simple. You know, I was talking about the Pleiadians, and one of their mistakes is they use a machine intelligence to bring somebody back from the dead from mechanical memory instead of the ensoulment of orgasm. And that physics difference has to do with long wave embedding in the DNA, what you would call having a soul. So the archetype of that difference between the Dark Lords, the Ahriman story, is simple. Those who understand what I call the DNA manifesto, goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto, all the pictures. It's simple. The DNA, by imploding with what you can call it orgasm or bliss or charged radiance, but the DNA has the potential to steer tornadoes and stars by growing your aura that big. And mechanical methods ultimately are going to fail. There is no mechanical solution to the propagation of consciousness through death. There is no mechanical solution. And that is the Tegatan Pleiadian mistake. That is why when they reincarnate mechanically, I call it a psychotic break. Hello, Swaru, you got a problem. So that discontinuity of memories. New Age woo-woos call it a walk-in experience. But as a psychologist, I can tell you, we call it more accurately a psychotic break. And the only possibility of real continuity of memory, which is the only way for real evolution of consciousness, is that mechanism of human bliss that really embeds the long wave contiguously. That's why it's so significant that DNA itself is the highest dimensional molecular structure in the universe. When you recursively braid implode DNA with bliss to the point of being toroidal, you've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12 superposed axes of charge spin rotation embedded. All the animations, goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. And that DNA's ability to be the most embeddable, the sexy physics term these days is called embedding, or but the entanglement. But the actual physics is entanglement embedding perfected is the problem phase conjugation solves, literally implosion. So DNA's ability to do that and make ensoulment is the real path to evolution. And everybody who's looking for the ghost in the machine does not understand that.
You brought up Enki and Enlil, and I mean, I've studied the tablets, I've studied the mythology, and I'm a huge fan of both. And it's like even our DNA, it's like is one strand Enki and one strand Enlil.
Well,
you got Anu right there in the center, and they're
it's a lot of people don't know that Enki's other name Ea, which is how Earth got its name, also means water. How the French word for water, du l'eau, L-E-A, and he looked like a frog, really. So my book on Enki's story, goldenmean.info/Enki, but a more accurate, historically researched, I believe, is Anton Park's work. And he traces from the day Enki woke up in the cloning cooking pot in Pleiades, Enki's real story. It's accurate. Fractalfield.com/Zeitlin, Zeitlin, and you can actually read Enki's real story. Anton Parks did good historical research. But he then became actually you'd say a forced ambassador for the Draco family. Remember, the Draco family has many branches, and so it's a big story. But it's true. Enki originally believed passionately in the value of his genetic experiments. Remember, his other name Nutimud means the cloner. And so the first time he got a fertile female, he actually used a white Draco that was red and white Draco, where we get the word Rothschild red Draco from, red shield. And because there was two kinds of phosphorus in the Draco blood, and the white Draco was thought to be unclonable, but when they did that the first time, they got the first fertile female. It's all in Anton Parks. So the point is that although he's the word Abra, when we say Abraham, the line of Abraham, we mean Enki. And when we say the line of Thutmose, the royal line of Egypt, it means Enki's science officer, Thoth Tahuti, who's also named Dawid, D-W-D, the line of David. It all refers to Thoth and Enki. So they are very dominant in Earth history, but there were hundreds of ET interventions here, but that's one of them. And it's a big story. But the theme of that story remains the same. Enki remained a trickster. He didn't think that his human clones, they called him Takadama, which means Borg or donkey or slave, from Orion, the red atom. But he didn't think they should be just slaves and snack food. And he snuck something interesting in here, the potential for ensoulment in the DNA mix. He believed in the DNA experiment. But that doesn't mean he wasn't a trickster. And he was not above taking some of his human genetic experiments for use in his own battles in Orion. Enki he remains a trickster today. So I don't think it's appropriate to just think of Enki and Enlil as hero stories. What we have to understand is the real lineage of humanoid evolution. And remember, the humanoid evolution on this planet fits a much bigger picture from when the Dracos invaded Vega and Lyra, and the humanoid diaspora went halfway across the galactic sector. And we were just a hideout for a certain time for Enki's family when they were running from those Pleiadians. Now, recently, the Pleiadians got kicked out of the Federation of Planets, and they lied about the reason for why, which has to do with the fact that they were abusing humans, which has to do with their secret agenda, which has to do with looking for the kind of DNA that could repair the fact that their DNA was decaying, because they lost track of how to keep a soul in the bloodline. And that's the theme. That's the That's the end of my presentation.
Jeez. What now? Fascinating, and a lot of what you're saying, I'm just I'm processing here, and I'm going back to some of the tablets that I've read, and some of the ancient mythology, and as far as the Orion stuff goes, and the like, where did the data come for that? Was it from ancient tablets, or was it from Zacharias Sitchin, or?
You can see the plasma map of Orion at goldenmean.info/Orion, along with the star maps. And that double cone plasma map was later called Yod He Vav He, 2 light cones, where we get the word Yahweh. Now, Yahweh was their name for someone who could inhabit an interstellar plasma. Now, remember, every single scientist who runs plasmauniverse.com now believes in angels. There's a reason for that. It's because plasma can become self-aware. And in the alphabet of those angels, you can read at goldenmean.info/Ophanim, which was later used to make the movie Stargate. That's how John Dee made the storm that took out the Spanish Armada. And this conversation with interstellar plasma beings is an indication of whether or not we're going to grow up, because until then our tornadoes should be unsteered, because that's called biofeedback. But the story of Orion is what you asked about. So Orion, being one of the most centripetal galactic plasma sectors in this galactic region, became the center of what we would call the Star Lords. And so many of the cultures, actually, the Draco became dominant in the Orion sector. And so therefore, all of the star maps on the planet, whether it's Enki in China or the pyramids in Giza, they all are star maps of Orion, including even the Hopi. They're all star maps of Orion. There's a good reason for that, because that's where the local interstellar government was based for a lot of that time. It's true. But remember, if you asked any of the indigenous families of Australia and New Zealand and 2/3 of the indigenous peoples on the planet, where home was locally, they will all point to Pleiades, just to be clear.
The Pleiades is the 7 sisters, and then Orion's belt would be, that's what the Great Pyramids of Giza are lining up to, the Orion's belt. So are they like star maps, or how do they get here? What kind of technologies are they using?
Well, they are the map of the plasma wind, and whatever is more centripetal is the governance. That's the beginning. So, of course, Orion is massively centripetal and therefore powerful. But, there's a relation between gravity and consciousness, because both are caused by fractality. But your question of how they got here, remember when they told us that if your ET came in a craft made of heavy metal, it means they're from the wrong side of the track. If they came in a plasma body made of genetic material through the heart of the sun, then they're worth talking to. That's a clue. In the heart of the sun, clairvoyants see the Anu there, 7 spins, 5 spins symmetry. The human heart and the heart of Hadron has the same Anu shape. And every religion on this planet eventually became sun god religion for that reason, because the sun is the most intelligent in this local neighborhood, for sure. But the mechanism of travel, your question, has to do with physics of Stargate. So if you start simply, you look at why phase conjugate broad spectral noble gas plasma, like Therify.net, is famous for induced lucid dreaming, literally plasma projection, not unlike astral travel or remote viewing. If you take and make it more broad spectral and higher power density, you have what's called a Stargate. There are some limitations to that, but just to give you a little clue, when they used the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet to make the movie Stargate, the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet, if you trace the slivers of the spiral and the torus, the symmetry index they represent is called a hypercube. You get all the graphics, goldenmean.info/Ophanim, Ophanim, all the graphics. And Rick Hasson, who made that film, was my boss when I started the video lab at Gaia, actually. But they use those letters to make that Stargate, because that's how you steer plasma into an implosive phase conjugate vortex. And if that's broad spectral enough, it's called a Stargate. What it means essentially is that every single node in the fractal array of the longitudinal component is a send-receive point on that distributed charge. And the reason you can act at a distance, because of course the longitudinal EMF goes through just about anything. It's how Ingo Swann lit that flame with his mind through a Faraday cage at a distance replicably in the laboratory repeatedly. We know the brainwave signature. It's named flameinmind.com. So that is a frequency signature of projective geometry. And when you implode, the phase velocity vectors go from transverse to longitudinal, like the Planck threshold, like a toothpaste tube. And that longitudinal interferometry then can be picked up anywhere you replicate the identical frequency conditions, literally the Stargate. So today, physicists admit that they're able to do something at a distance by what they call entanglement. We now know you perfect that, it's called broad spectral phase conjugation. That's how they travel.
Jeez. Now, I'm on your website, flameinmind.com, and I want to show this to people. So this has got, like, if they want to download apps for their phones, are you on the App Store also?
Yes, we have 6 apps on the App Store. That's one of them, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And this kind of brings your, like, the frequency that's emitting through the phone or the speaker is connecting to your brainwaves?
No. Flameinmind.com uses a headset, Muse 2 headset. It looks like sunglasses. I think I had one. It's over on the table. But it looks like sunglasses. It's Bluetooth. And it communicates with iPhone, iPad, iOS, and will efficiently pick up 4-channel full brainwave analysis. You know, we learned that for bliss, you need rear brain dominance at the reptilian brain stem. The sports enthusiasts call it getting in the flow. You must relax and let the rear brain steer reptilian, the fast response time. And by measuring 4-channel EEG, you can teach rear brain dominance, and then you can teach alpha, then you teach right-left coherence, and finally you can teach golden ratio alpha to beta, and that's the physics of bliss. You can see that I can make 5 harmonics in golden ratio in my brainwaves often, which is the real physics of bliss. And when we measure kids who can see without their eyes, you can see the Kids Seeing Without Their Eyes project, flameinmind.com/outer vision. You see all the kids seeing without their eyes. And when they make that cascade of frequencies from alpha to gamma, there's an implosion, and all the kids seeing without their eyes say, "I'm seeing through a vortex tube." Hint, hint. What do you think that means?
Vortex tube. Their pineal gland?
Well, no, what it is, Korotkov first measured the most dominant indicator of kids who can see without their eyes was golden ratio in the frequency of alpha to beta, which is basically caduceus implosion. So there's getting centripetal. And when that centripetal vortex converges accurately, the pine cones kiss noses, and it does have to do with pineal, then there's the moment of vision through the center of that plasma donut. The cause of perception is phase conjugation. That's why you can take it with you outside your head under the right conditions, literally get centripetal. So that's why 30% of people who experience our plasma, Therify.net, report sharpening of vision, because you get centripetal. So you're literally see through the center of the vortex. A prime example is why ball lightning toroids are so famous for responding to telepathy.
So I've had out-of-body experiences before. I've lucid dreamed before.
Excellent.
And
good.
When I had my first out-of-body experience, I didn't even, I wasn't even trying to. I was just going to sleep. I popped out of my body. It scared me. I woke myself back up, and then I did it again. I started to fall asleep. I popped out of my body. I could see everything in real time.
Great. And excellent. Good for you.
It was awesome.
Congrats.
It was awesome. So it was awesome.
Wonderful.
At that point, and at that point in time, though, I wasn't as spiritually evolved. I don't feel I was kind of more under the Bible mindset, like, am I going to get possessed by a demon? Praying to Jesus every night, and now I look at it as a learning experience. I mean, I love Jesus, but I don't look at Jesus the same way I used to. I think there's a lot of disinformation about.
Well, he was actually in the bloodline of Tutankhamun, and it was part of the sun god religion called the I That Is Us. So there was some Essene reality there. But back to the physics, the instruction here is to note the conditions which enable you to emerge from your body, which is charge coherence. For example, sunrise, sunset, equinox, position on a magnetic line, and in a structure that's charged centripetal. So if your structure is all metal and all electrosmog, this is going to be much more difficult. Whereas if you're in a sacred stone circle in a sacred forest, you got a shot at this, et cetera, et cetera. So it's charge propagation enabled by fractality. And that's the limitation of outer body. And that's an introduction to astral hygiene, too, because the entities that might sort of be parasites, functionally, they're all toasted by the presence of implosion. What that means is if you have access to a meaningful source of bliss, you will never have a problem with any kind of parasite, actually. Because the physics is that at that source of fusion in the blood, only shareable waves survive. It's literally an electrical test for pure intention. So if, in fact, you have a regular bliss process, it's the ultimate solution of parasites, both intestinal and astral. So astral hygiene 101 is, if you have a source of bliss, not only are you steering tornadoes, but
yeah, I've got a book called Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden, where he teaches a lot of these skills.
Good. Barden is
and
good. Yes.
But he's talking like what you're saying. You can actually control the weather. You can do things with your body that don't sound like, if you're raised in a specific reality, or you have certain beliefs or egos, you're not going to be able to get to these points because it sounds out of this world. You have to control the weather with your mind. But it's not.
Actually, it's an indication of, well, the reason the elementals think we're drunk for not talking to them, and they don't bother to steer the tornadoes, is because we need biofeedback. In fact, it's natural. If your aura doesn't grow big enough to inhabit a plasma cloud, then you're not growing up at all. So you start with simple physics. Any child who's reasonably happy and barefoot in the mud can focus and put a hole in a cloud. The physics is that the focused attention is centripetal, which is what teaches water vapor to become a droplet. The name for that is called Christos. Literally, it's the only physics of Christos. So how the water vapor crystallized is the physics of precipitation introduced by permission to touch. It's the same physics for why, if patriarchy spreads, it causes the spread of deserts. It's been measured. The reason that's called James DeMeo and desertification and patriarchy, William Reich. So the reason that patriarchy causes the spread of deserts, and it's been measured, is because it's the opposite of permission to touch.
.440 hertz versus 432. Almost all production is in 440, and that's very bizarre to me.
Remember that all of our Western music is based on the octave. The physics is that octave ratios, powers of 2, is the way to prevent constructive interference. So if you do all the possible ratios of musically, and you get to the octave, that is the maximum possible destructive interference among waves, period. That's called incubation. It's perfect for crystallization, literally charge isolation defined. The opposite of that is golden ratio, which we now have proven by equations, the same equation that proved that is the cause, and I mean the fractal cause of gravity, is because golden ratio is the opposite. It is actually the mathematical perfection of constructive wave interference, and therefore non-destructive compression, and therefore the answer to every single problem in modern science is the problem of compression. Urban design, alchemy, evolution of the stars, evolution of consciousness. Every single problem you can name is a solution to the problem of compression. Architecture is a solution. But if you don't know the solution to the problem of compression, which in short is golden ratio fractality, obviously you don't have an answer for any of the questions like life force and gravity in modern science. Anyway, so because Western music is based on the octave, it is by definition the most dissociative. Literally, I mean, octaves in brainwaves is the definition of dissociation in psychology. We measured it. Octaves create telepathy, golden ratio creates bliss and EEG. So, with an octave-based musical scale, you are by definition creating a form of dissociation. So there's great limitations. We do all the math and physics here to see which way you could create the most golden ratio harmonics in conventional musical scale. And all of this analyzed, complete with charts and tables, everything, at fractalfield.com/implosion sound. You will see the answer to your question. And the answer is shortly that you can make a few more of the harmonics in the musical scale implosive phase constant Golden ratio by using 432 than you can use by 440. However, there's many other issues, which has to do with the limitations of the octave itself. So people who say that 432 music is the solution to all their problems are very superficial here. The solution is implosion, that's clear, because if you can't get centripetal, you can't make gravity, life, or consciousness.
I'm looking at the super imploder on your, is this your website?
Yeah, theimploder.com. So I took my equation for the geometry of hydrogen and made the perfect vortex named Schauberger's dream. And we have a whole line of water implosion technologies, theimploder.com. The imploder shower, the triploder, and then the super imploder. But just recently, the super imploder has been replaced with the ultra imploder, which you'll see at the bottom of theimploder.com, because it's solid, stainless, and bulletproof. And every single Amish farmer in Ohio who saw one immediately bought it because of the difference in taste in water. And it's really quite simple. By teaching water to implode, and if the water's hard, it's even more powerful because it's piezo. So a seed growing next to that vortex will grow faster even if it doesn't get the water because of the implosive charge of the perfect vortex. Anyway, so that you get a dramatic, we combine magnetics, centripetal magnetics with centripetal charge of pull. We make a dramatic reduction in molecular cluster size and a dramatic increase in solubility, which is hydration. And hydration is not just a revolution in agriculture, like 30 to 60% average increase in growth in hemp, marijuana, for example. But hydration is the limitation of half of human disease.
So if you put one of those under your faucet in your kitchen and shower head,
now
that might be an awesome benefit.
The vortex only triploder and shower will be particularly powerful if you have relatively hard water because the vortex is piezo. But for the most powerful effect, the ultra imploder. The ultra imploder is very heavy. It weighs about 34 pounds, solid stainless, 1-inch, bulletproof, commercial rated. It's amazing, amazingly powerful. We're talking 4,000 Gauss magnetics. It's an amazing machine. Advertised at $2,200 US. We have a special on it around $1,800 with shipping. But that is the most powerful product.
Okay. And I want to jump back for a minute to Enki, Enlil, and this, because like the old Babylonian stuff, you can read a ton of this stuff. Most of the religions, like you said, are based upon the ancient Sumer stuff. So they show up here, they start like, were Enki and Enlil fighting amongst each other?
Well,
they like, what's their deal?
The local battle, if the word, just as you mentioned, Ba-Bel, if you know the actual Sumerian, Ba was Enlil's name for Enki, actually, Ba-Bel. And El means phase shift, which means those who can translate vorticity in their blood. The Elohim literally means those who can get longitudinal, actually, the Ba-Bel. But the bigger picture, the local squabbles you can read about in Sumerian, you can read about them in Anton Parks, and they're local squabbles. But the big picture is more interesting. The big picture is when they came here, early in their time, what we would call the reptilian, it's a big family, the Uru, you can see all the branches at Anton Parks, were winning the interstellar wars, and they had killed a high percentage of the humanoids in Vega and Lyra. But gradually, the humanoids and the Federation of Planets got more powerful, and they were able to corner them here. So Enki's family represented a branch of the Draco family, and their fear of women is the origin of all of our religions, basically. But the Federation of Planets at that time, mostly with the Andromedans, were able to install in the artificial hollow metal moon a series of nuclear frequency generators which prevented implosion. They were at 50 hertz as the key frequency, incidentally. And so what we call the rapture is the moment when those frequency generators, which interfere with the implosion called stargates, trapping them here. Those nuclear generators in the hollow metal moon are now breaking, and they're shot. And the frequency, what's called frequency fence, the quarantine, whatever you want to call it, which wasn't working at this point anyway to keep reptilian Draco in here. And they were not intending to, keep the humanoids here, but this was, we were collateral damage. And so that in part is why more and more humans are going to be able to lucid dream, for example, because our atmosphere, Schumann harmonics, can become more implosive. If you go to every pyramid around, you get 53 hertz, when the correct frequency would be 50 hertz, but that has the effect that the Schumann resonance at 8.7 or 7.8 hertz should actually be 7.23 to be golden ratio times Planck. So that difference of 53 to 50 hertz is measurable and teaches you when the nuclear generators of the frequency quarantine are breaking down. More humans are going to be able to lucid dream. And the reason Christians call it the rapture, which is really charge implosion, you do not want to be the left behind, is very simple. The guns will melt because they're the wrong dielectric constant.
So the frequencies are going to change everything on the outside, essentially.
Well, it means that people that can withstand a certain amount of bliss will become much more charge radiant, and the people that can't will go insane much faster. That's the simple practice. It's similar to birth and, well, let's say similar to bliss and death. To do it successfully, you need to get ready to compress. Death is an electrical black hole. Death visions are electrically contagious for that reason. In the symmetry sequence you see, the Clouvet form constant is proof. Death is an electrical black hole. There's even an infrasound that you hear during death that tells you whether you're doing the compression well. It's all at goldenmean.info/immortality. The physics of successful death is very electrical engineering. Anyway, so to prepare for that, you go through and say, which of my memories are not shareable? Which is to say, each of your memories that serves collective survival can withstand compression, and therefore can be imploded through that Planck threshold and become longitudinal, the collective unconscious, literally ancestor memory. So to become part of that, you have to go through compression. And to survive that compression, it's called get shareable or /fractal or get dead, similar to the bumper sticker. And so that ability is introduction to the physics of rapture. And of course, structures which can't withstand electrical compression, the wrong dielectric constant, hint, hint, the guns will melt.
It's the next level. Now I see why people wanted me to get you on the show. This is like brain candy, but it's a full-on marathon at the same time, just to keep up. Usually I could do 3 or 4 things at once. Dan the man, with you, I got to focus 100%, and I'm still trying to keep up. So this is great. This is great. Now, I had a guest on recently that had some Toltec knowledge, medicine man who lives in Mexico City, beautiful soul, and he said something about when you pass, depending on where you leave the body, is going to be, if that's going to be like where you, so if you leave through the liver, then you're going to be in a situation that's really, like you're going to be dealing with your karma from the past life. Not necessarily like things you feel like you did wrong, but things that you need to settle to get balanced. Then he brought up going through the top of the head and the heart. I thought that was really fascinating.
Well,
connecting with the sun.
Most of the indigenous traditions, their teacher was Thoth Hermes Tahuti, who there was named Viracocha Quetzalcoatl, or the great blonde-haired, blue-eyed and Iroquois. And that is behind how, for example, the Olmec knew how to use a black obsidian mirror for calling their ancestors. It's called a phase conjugate mirror. It's the same one that John Dee used for his showstone for scrying with angels, and the way Nostradamus was able to see because of the phase conjugate black coating under his water scrying. So the phase conjugate mirror is basically the electron cloud that allows communication with ancestors. And this was a skill that was well possessed by those cultures. And they even knew how to make statues of the right dielectric. The Olmec did. So it's true that the part of your body that becomes the lens for your plasma to project through will have a lot to do with where the centripetal force is generated and the resultant frequency signature. And it's true, the natural path out of the head, which would generally be the top of the throat, I believe, similar to the tantric switch for Kundalini. And from there, you get the ability to plasma project and hopefully return and use the body as a temple, as the advanced Tibetans do, who coat their saints with thin film gold for that reason. And note that it's well proven that rainbows occur at the death of Tibetan saints. And we understand well the physics, because that's the centripetal force, which is the physics of the origin of color in rainbows. So you make that centripetal force and contribute to your environment at death.
Oh man, that gave me the chills. That reminds me of when my grandpa passed, and my grandma on that side had passed a few years before him. But after the funeral, I was driving home and we saw a double rainbow. And I thought, Grandma and Grandpa, that's so cool, man. That's beautiful, actually. Kind of, wow, got me a little emotional there. So I love what you're doing, Dan. You're really bringing a lot of stuff to the forefront that is, science meets metaphysical. You've got the abstract meeting the very refined. And I'm going to have to go back and watch this podcast a few times and get acclimated to some of the verbiage that you use, because it's incredible, but I need to catch up. So I would love it if we could have you as a guest on the show again in the future.
Well, thank you. Incidentally, people can read the physics of how phase conjugate fractality is the reason rainbows and colors exist at fractalfield.com/fractal photosynthesis. And yes, I'm very open to coming on your show. Actually, my throat is giving out a little bit here, so I have to call it a night too. But I'm really happy to be with you.
Well, Dan, thank you for letting me know that, because I could have talked to you for another 24 hours straight and then had to take a big nap. You're awesome. Thanks again. And your books, I want to let people know about, so they can get those on. Should they go through your website, or is it okay to get it on Amazon? Or what would you recommend?
Fractalfield.com has the printed book and 3 online books at Amazon, all linked at fractalfield.com. 4 books there.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us.
Blessings.
Hit the bell, be well, subscribe to Dan the Man's YouTube channel, Daniel Winter, and be the change you want to see, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Blessings.